Next on Unsolved Mysteries. Dan Montecalvo is serving 27 years to life for his wife's murder, but he just might be an innocent man. Is this sea monster just a legend or a real dinosaur, as eyewitnesses claim? A young man embarks on a spiritual journey across the New Mexico desert and then mysteriously vanishes. And an outlaw biker who manufactures methamphetamines finally gets caught. 5 stories of crime, deceit, and intrigue. I'm Dennis Farina, and this is Unsolved Mysteries. Join us. Burbank, California.
Shot.
I can't understand you. Were you shot?
Yes, in my right too. Please hurry.
Police received a frantic 911 call from a man who said he and his wife had been shot by intruders.
I'm on the way.
Moments later, patrol units surrounded the home of Dan and Carol Montecalvo. Dan had been shot once in the lower back, but was able to leave the house on his own. Inside, officers found his wife, Carol, mortally wounded, shot twice in the neck. At first, police believed that it was a clear case of a burglary that had ended in violence. However, within 24 hours, they began to think that Dan Montecalvo had staged the entire episode. They suspected he'd murdered his wife. Montecalvo was formally charged with murder. Today, he is serving 27 years to life for a crime that he swears he did not commit.
Did you kill your wife?
No,
Could you have?
never.
Why not?
I mean, I loved her. I loved her. I mean, the bond we had was not just an emotional bond and a physical bond, but a spiritual bond.
To the police, Dan Montecalvo was a murder suspect with an obvious motive. He was an alcoholic ex-convict with huge gambling debts, and his wife was worth more than $500,000 in life insurance. Dan has always insisted that Carol was murdered by intruders, and now a witness has come forward to confirm his story. Dan Montecalvo met Carol in the state penitentiary in Oxford, Wisconsin. She was a prison minister. He was serving 20 years for bank robbery.
She had so much goodness, such a joy, such a peace about her, that she would light up a room anytime she walked in. The smile, the eyes would just capture you. So in a period of about 1.5 years, we fell in love. It's a difficult place to fall in love, but we did.
Dan and Carol married. Dan received an early parole, and eventually the couple moved to California. A few years later, Dan was diagnosed with a bleeding ulcer. Unable to work, he drank heavily and gambled.
Another one.
When Carol won a trip to Hawaii through her job, both of them hoped that it would be like a second honeymoon.
So what else did you do today?
You know.
What you are about to see is Dan Montecalvo's version of what happened the night before their departure. At about 10:30, Dan and Carol went for a walk, as they did almost every night.
Carol and I had did some shopping that night to pick up some last-minute items. And then, as was our habit, changed clothes and took a walk. This is a night we're happy, we're going away tomorrow, just looking forward to it. Because we were taking Carol's car the next morning, we had decided to change the registration tag on Carol's car. Her registration expired that night at midnight.
Oh, honey, give me your keys and I'll go get a paper towel to clean that.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And with that, she went into the house. and I was thinking about putting the water sprinkler on because we're going to be gone for a week. I heard her say something, and it got my attention. As soon as I ran inside, I was grabbed from behind. I felt something pressed into my back. I knew it was a gun. As I twisted, I saw a mustache. I remember going down. I remember a voice saying, "Let's get out of here." And because I was laying right there by the front door, you know, you just got the sense of people going out the front door. So I was able to get up, look out the front door, see if I could see. I couldn't see nothing.
Dan had been shot once in the lower back. No vital organs were hit, and there was almost no bleeding. When he saw Carol lying in the hallway, he ran to call 911. The office phone was broken, so Montecalvo ran to the living room. It was 11:01 p.m.
What's your emergency?
Please come. Hurry up. We've been shot.
What?
Shot.
I can't understand you. Were you shot?
Yes, and my wife too. Please hurry.
I'm on the way. We're on the way.
Patrol units soon began to arrive. The officers proceeded cautiously, thinking that the gunman may still be inside the house. Dan says that he stayed with his wife. Still, no one entered the home. Finally, Dan Montecalvo came to the front door, calling to the police to help his wife. The police could not hear what he was saying. They yelled for him to come out with his hands up. Dan claims at first he could not hear the police. At least 10 minutes after Dan Montecalvo called 911, the police finally entered his house. Carol Montecalvo was pronounced dead at the scene.
Police department is about 2 minutes from my home. You know? St. Joseph's Hospital is 1 minute from my home. If my wife could have got help at the trauma center, it was a certified trauma center, she might be alive today.
That night, the bullet was removed from Dan's back. For the next 4 days, detectives searched his house. At first, they found evidence to support Montecalvo's story. There was a small slit in the rear screen door. A cash box in the filing cabinet containing it had been jimmied open. Dan claimed $800 was missing.
Hurry, bring me one of those baggies here.
Police also found the shell casing from the bullet that hit Dan. Yet, other things didn't make sense. Carol's purse was left untouched, and the police didn't think that a burglar would break into a house with all the lights on and 2 cars in the driveway. And then they learned that Dan Montecalvo was a convicted bank robber.
I think once they ran the rap sheet on Dan and saw some of his paranoid tendencies and his fear of the police, that they eliminated any other option. And everything began being put into a pretty much seen through a tunnel vision of this guy had to have done it. Now let's prove it.
According to Montecalvo's lawyers, the Burbank police secretly tape-recorded conversations with him.
I'd like to ask you some questions about what happened that night.
I already told you everything that happened that night. I told you already.
Well, you don't mind, do you, Danny? I mean, you don't have anything to hide, do you?
No, I have anything to hide.
In one conversation, Dan revealed that Carol had been heavily insured and that he owed more than $20,000 in gambling debts.
It gave them all they needed to believe there was a motive. It was very simple. If he killed Carol, he walked with more than $500,000.
That, coupled with the fact that I have a record, that coupled with the fact that in their minds nobody else was there, I was guilty. And they were never going to look anywhere else.
The investigation dragged on for over a year. Dan sold his house and put most of his belongings in storage. 14 months after Carol's death, he filed a negligence suit against the Burbank Police Department, alleging that his wife might have survived if the police had responded more quickly. Some thought that Dan was trying to capitalize on his wife's death. Around the same time, detectives obtained a warrant to search his storage locker. They found what they believed had been the hiding place for the murder weapon, a hollowed-out book.
The hollowed-out book was the most compelling piece of evidence against Dan. It was the exact size of the two guns, and if you worked the two guns in the right direction, it exactly fit the same guns that were used in this crime.
The case against Montecalvo was getting stronger. When we return, a witness says that she knows who committed the murder and that it wasn't Dan Montecalvo. In the months after Carol Montecalvo's murder, police began to build a case against her husband.
Excuse me.
Dan Montecalvo was a known heavy drinker, and his character had become a major issue.
And when I go to Vegas, they treat me like a king.
Detectives found witnesses who said that while Carol was still alive, Dan had a reputation for coming on to women in local bars.
I would like you to go to Vegas with me.
The image of the DA painting me as some sort of character, you know, that was out there drinking and carousing, whatever, it's not factual. I challenged the prosecutor from the stand to bring one woman into court that said I cheated on my wife with her. One. But they couldn't. I was no angel. I was a jerk many times, okay? But what they painted me as, no.
Nearly 2 years after Carol's death, Dan Montecalvo was formally charged with murder. At the trial, Montecalvo and his attorney hoped to prove that other people beside Dan and Carol had been at the crime scene. The police investigation uncovered a number of fingerprints which they could never identify. Also, partial footprints lifted from their kitchen floor could not be tied to Dan or Carol. This evidence seemed to back up Dan's story. In addition, police had questioned neighbors who said they heard people running from Dan and Carol's house on the night of the murder. One man said they knocked over the ladder in his backyard.
Police department. Sorry to
A
disturb
woman
you.
named Susan Brown, who lived 2 doors away, said her wood pile had been knocked down when someone jumped over her fence.
I have a pile of wood back in the backyard. I heard it fall down. Didn't think nothing of it, you know.
At the trial, Brown testified on Montecalvo's behalf, but her testimony had no effect on the outcome. Dan Montecalvo was convicted and given the maximum sentence, 27 years to life. But his court-appointed investigator continued to believe that Dan was innocent.
Before that trial came to an end, I knew Dan was innocent. That was when I first contacted Susan Brown and began talking to her.
After Dan's conviction, Gene Briscoe worked on his own time and without pay. He continued pressing Brown for details.
If I guess what happened in that house, would you tell me?
Finally, Susan Brown made a stunning admission.
Okay, you were in that house and you shot Carol, is that right?
I didn't shoot Carol. I shot Dan, but I didn't shoot Carol.
People keep saying Dan shot his wife. Dan didn't shoot his wife because I'm the one that shot Dan. And my partner shot Carol.
Susan says that she and her friends were partying. They ran out of drugs and they needed some quick cash. They knew that Dan and Carol were going to be in Hawaii. They thought they'd already gone. And that's when Dan and Carol came home from their walk, because indeed they were not gone.
They're here now. Come on, go scare her.
The next thing I can only remember was hearing when Carol says, "What are you doing here?"
and then 2 shots fired. I didn't deliberately shoot Dan. I ended up wrestling with him and the gun going off.
Now that fits Dan's story perfectly. So in that sense, it definitely lends a lot of credibility to Dan.
Dan Montecalvo's version of events differs from Susan Brown's in only one crucial detail. Dan still insists that his assailant had a mustache.
I know when I was grabbed, I twisted and I saw that mustache. Right? And I thought the person that grabbed me was strong. I know was taller. I don't know how tall Susan Brown thinks she's that tall. There's one of the possibilities that Susan cannot admit that she shot my wife.
I believe, beyond any doubt whatsoever, that she's telling the truth, that she was in fact there. And she did, in fact, shoot someone. She told me that Carol had lost one of her flip-flops, and that can only be verified by a police report, which was taken by Burbank. She gave me the color of the cash box, taking of $800. She mentioned a slit in the screen. That was never made public. She's consistent with the type of weapon that was used, both weapons, a .38, a .25. I'm convinced beyond any doubt whatsoever that she was inside that house and took part of that.
Susan Brown's confession prompted a month-long investigation by the DA's office. However, he refused to reopen the case. Susan Brown allegedly had a history of mental illness, and some believe that she made up the entire story simply to get attention.
Who in their right mind would sit and say they had something to do with a murder, knowing damn well they could put them away, when there's already someone sitting paying for a crime? Who would be stupid enough to come forward and say that? Unless they're going through what I'm going through. Because they did do it.
Dan Montecalvo is convinced Susan Brown was involved in his wife's murder. He believes he was convicted not because of anything that happened that night, but because of his criminal past.
I have a record. Does that make me a murderer? I'm a gambler. That makes me a murderer. My wife has insurance. That makes me a murderer. Forgetting the emotional part and how much I love Carol, okay? You think I'm going to sit there and shoot myself in the back? I mean, it's so absurd. It's pathetic.
Just 17 days after he was sentenced, Dan Montecalvo remarried. His new wife was one of Carol's close friends from church. Montecalvo is currently incarcerated at Vacaville Prison, where he is serving his sentence of 27 years to life.
Next, the hunt for evidence of a legendary sea monster. In Scotland, it's the Loch Ness Monster. In New York's Lake Champlain, it's Champ. There's Ogopogo in British Columbia. And finally, in Cadborough Bay, Canada, it's the legendary Caddy.
The thing I noticed most about it was its eyes, that they were big and they were serpent-like.
The odor from it was just incredible. It permeated, it made you want to vomit.
It went down and a hump came up, and then it went down and another hump came up, and it was like it was moving.
Cadborosaurus, Caddy for short, is the sea monster of Cadborough Bay. Many people believe that this is the carcass of just such a creature. Computer enhancement gives us an idea of what it might have looked like before it was eaten by a whale.
In 1937, there was a whaling station in the north part of British Columbia, and one of the whale boats harpooned this big sperm whale about 6 hours run from the whaling station, towed it back, and the flensers got to it fairly quickly.
Flensers are the workers who butcher the whales once they're brought to the shore. Inside the stomach of this one, they made an astonishing find.
They came across this incredible snake-like thing. None of them had ever seen it before in years of whaling and flensing. They knew it was something different.
James Wakeland, then a 24-year-old blacksmith, saw the creature with his own eyes.
I don't know. I got no idea what it is. I haven't got a clue. Never seen anything like it. And I guess somebody thought, well, that's a queer-looking affair there. We better get the manager. And he got it brought down, and he took the pictures.
The creature was about 12 feet long. It had a head shaped like a horse or a camel and a thin snake-like body approximately 16 inches around.
It has a pair of hind flippers that were webbed together with the tail to form this whale-like fluke, which undoubtedly provided the main driving force for this animal.
The whalers sent part of the specimen to a museum. There, the director, Francis Kermode, dismissed it as the fetus of a baleen whale and tossed it out. But even to untrained eyes, a baleen whale fetus looks unlike the carcass that they found in the whale.
If he just stopped and thought, would these men send down a fetal baleen whale? I dissected hundreds of these things out of dead whale uteruses every week. They knew what a fetal baleen whale. So that was really not complimentary to these professional whalers.
Skeptics claim the photo may be a hoax, but that hardly explains the people who insist they've seen Caddy. William Hagelin was sailing in a remote cove when he and his sons caught what he now believes was a baby caddy.
Looked like a little garter snake, about 16 inches long, maybe the thickness of my thumb. But it had a little shoulders with little flippers on its shoulders, and a bit of a neck, not much, and a head on it with two bright brown eyes looking at us.
Hagelin sketched the animal in detail. He wanted to take it to the nearest biology station, but he was at least a day away.
Through the evening, I could hear this little thing making quite a fuss in the bucket that we'd put it into. You could see that he was quite terrified and quite put out with all of this, so I felt that maybe if we tried to hold him over a night that he might perish. I just, after a great deal of soul searching, decided to put it back in the water and leave it be.
For the second time, what was thought to be a caddy was thrown back in the bay. With the help of a paleontologist, we applied computer animation to the photographs of Cadborosaurus. A caddy 7 meters long would probably have at least 360 vertebrae. That would give it enough flexibility to form the hoops so often seen by eyewitnesses. But unlike a snake, which can only wiggle from side to side, a Cadborosaurus could move itself forward using its tail fluke and steering with its forefins like a sea lion. At least 6 times a year, there are sightings of this exact creature.
I was walking my dog Lady, and as we were coming down the path to the beach, she was struggling to get away from me. She just didn't want to go to the beach. Finally, I pulled her, and she got closer, and as I turned to look down, I saw this face looking at me. And it was shaped like a horse face, and there were eyes that were like a snake. And as I looked at it, it looked at me, and then it dropped its head below the cliff. It sort of took my breath away when I saw it.
Heard a sound, thought it was probably a whale or something, looked out, didn't see much, and heard it again and saw like a strange head out of the water about 50, 60 feet away.
It had the definite snout with a big, large head, really rocky looking. A really greeny black color, almost like a garbage bag color.
It was a very odd looking thing. It had 2 vertical hoops. As we were on approach, we could see that it was moving very quickly through the water, and I would estimate to be about 40 miles per hour. And we could actually see through the 2 hoops. We could see, what was on the other side of the hoop, so that was very strange. It was the most unique thing I've ever seen in the waters around here. I've seen lots of different things, but I've never seen something like that.
It's just a question of time until somebody a viewing, one of the 6 or 8 people who see it every year is going to luck in with either a still camera or a video. But it's such a rare occasion that at the moment we can only say the animal is rare, but it's there.
Skeptics claim caddy eyewitnesses are mistaken. They believe they're probably seeing humpback whales, elephant seals, basking sharks, or maybe a herd of sea lions. Hopefully, the next person to get a hold of a caddy will resist the urge to dump it back in the bay. Maybe then this unsolved mystery will finally be solved. Next, a successful stock analyst sets out on a journey of self-discovery and disappears. Many believe the desert that stretches across Arizona and New Mexico is a source of mystical power. Here in this beautiful but unforgiving wilderness, a strange and intriguing mystery began one Halloween. Dawn. Local farmer Larry Rivers speaks with an unusual young man. The stranger claims to be searching for the beast.
It was pretty cold that morning. I come driving out my road and this guy was walking down here in a short sleeve shirt, a pair of shorts on, carrying a stick in his hand. Hello, you lost?
No, I'm not lost.
What are you doing out here?
I'm looking for the beast.
And I told him he wasn't going to find the beast out here, and he told me he'd find him.
Well, I'm gonna keep looking.
I thought it was weird.
The stranger was 29-year-old David Stone, and Larry Rivers was the last person to ever see him. David Stone was a highly successful stockbroker. Then he decided to change his life and became involved with a New Age movement. His obsession with spirituality may have sent him on a journey from which there was no return.
Well, I think he could best be described as an overachiever in just about every way. You've never met a kinder, gentler young man than him. But then on the other hand, you put him in a football uniform and he was like a proverbial commando.
For years, David struggled with his dual nature. One day, he temporarily lost control during a party at his own apartment.
Hey, what's going on? David started hitting him. He said he might have hit him, 20, 25 times, and he didn't really hurt him, but felt like he had to do that.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah. Where are you going?
The next morning, David told John that he needed to get away. He said that he would be back in just a few days. David's abandoned car was discovered many days later on New Mexico's desolate Highway 80. Police interviewed local residents, and several said they had seen David.
We had left our home in Cotton City and were driving up to the ranch. As we went by, we saw this young man, and we thought perhaps he'd had car trouble, so we stopped.
No, I'm okay.
And so we just went on.
I heard this voice, and I seen this man walking across the way there. Thought it was unusual that he'd be going out across the desert at that time of the year in shorts.
David's car was found near the Pyramid mountain range. Pyramids are a key part of New Age philosophy. Each year, many believers come here to experience what is known as Vision Quest, a journey to find one's inner self. It is believed that through isolation and meditation, a person can experience a vision that reveals their true identity.
I am convinced once he arrived at that location that he felt like this would be the perfect starting point for whatever vision quest he personally felt that he had to embark on. In that process, you have to face what they term as being the beast. This beast is that evil or negativism which is in you.
4 days after David's abandoned car was found, a full-scale manhunt was launched. For 3 days, planes and trackers scoured the desert. David's trail headed northwest from his car in the direction of Granite Peak.
We thought it was interesting because that mountain from the south looks kind of pyramid shaped. It has an interesting look to it that might have meant something to his religion, it might not have.
Just 1/2 mile from the highway, searchers discovered the first in a series of bizarre clues that David left behind.
That's when they found a large pyramid up in that wash. It had been made out of sand, mounded up, and rocks on the corner. That was the first thing we found.
After I got further down the canyon, it seemed like the tracks were real fresh. I had a real strange feeling. The hair stood up on my arms, and I had an intense feeling that he was sitting watching me.
Did you find something?
Trackers discovered another puzzling clue on the second day. Once again, David had built a small pyramid. This time, he left behind his gold Rolex watch and 2 quarters.
I don't know what that means. Must be something to do with his religion.
The coins and David's watch were found here, about 1/4 mile from the first pyramid. Approximately 3 miles to the north, another clue was discovered. Searchers came upon a strange sequence of numbers written in the sand. These numbers, called the Fibonacci series, are used by stock market analysts. The last number in the sequence should have been 21. Oddly, David wrote 18.
He knew better than that. So it's one of the mysteries, is why would he write 18 instead of 21?
David's family believes the number 18 may have been David's way of telling them that he was in trouble. In fact, his car was found at mile marker 18, and during his senior year in college, 18 was David's uniform number. On the final day of the search, bloodhounds tracked David's scent over the rocky desert back to Highway 80. At the intersection of Highway 80 and Interstate 10, David's trail suddenly ended. This was about 13 miles north of where his car had been found.
We took it to be a hopeful sign that he had hitchhiked out or that somebody had given him a ride, and that was the only thing we could understand that would mean why the scent disappeared like it did.
Well, I just kept feeling that everything was there to let us know what had happened, but we just weren't seeing it.
What could they have been missing? Carol and Harry Stone went through the items David left in his car. One of the things they found was a very strange note.
The note said, they think the word is in the safe. 6 knives in Rob's room. Use buys your tea and use takes your chances, Halloween. And that was the day he disappeared, which was October 31st, Halloween.
What was the meaning behind the strange clues that David left across the desert? And what became of them after he reached the intersection of Highway 80 and Interstate 10? Update. 4 years after David Stone disappeared, 2 hunters found his remains in the Granite Gap area of New Mexico. There were no signs of foul play. An autopsy could not determine the cause or exact time of death. To this day, what happened to David remains a baffling mystery. If you should have any information about the death of David Stone, please log on to our website at unsolved.com. Coming up, a search for the outlaw biker behind $1 million meth lab. On a previous program, we examined the case of a Florida widow we called Mrs. K. She claimed that she was romanced and then swindled by a man named Arthur Frankfurt. After only a 4-week courtship, Frankfurt convinced Mrs. K to let him move in.
Never once was I suspicious of any move that he made as far as to question his character, who he was, and that he was a liar and a thief.
But one day, while Mrs. K was at work, Frankfurt disappeared and allegedly stole jewelry worth over $4,000, as well as many personal items belonging to Mrs. K's late husband. Arthur Frankfurt was wanted by Florida police for burglary, grand theft auto, and check forgery. Authorities believed that he may have victimized over 40 women by stealing their hearts and then taking their cash. Update. Within minutes of our broadcast, 2 viewers called to report that they recognized Arthur Frankfurt.
The individual said, "I know where Arthur Frankfurt is. I'm his ex-brother-in-law." We received another call about 20 minutes later from a white female. Says, "Arthur Frankfurt lives next door to me in Whitley, Kentucky." This was the confirmation call that I was looking for. At that time, I knew we had our man.
Just 2 hours later, Frankfurt was arrested at his home in Kentucky. He was living under the assumed name James Ferguson with his brand new wife of 2 months. During a search of Frankfurt's home, police found identification and credit cards with different names. They also found a handgun that may have been stolen from Mrs. K's home. Police ultimately determined that Arthur Frankfurt's real name was Harry Fielding Donaldson. He was tried and found guilty of fraud.
The war on drugs is often a battle against small illicit labs. Drug dealers use common chemicals to make highly addictive meth, crank, or crystal.
One of the most notorious of these meth cooks was Jonathan John Brown, also known as Thumper. According to investigators, he operated meth labs across the country.
His normal mode of operation would be to have any one of his cronies set up the lab for him, just basically have all the chemicals and all the necessities on hand, so when he shows up, he would not have to do any manual labor type operations. He just gets right to the cook, gets it done, and gets out of the area, and takes his rewards with him.
Thumper was a charter member of a motorcycle gang known as the Hessians. He was a federal fugitive with outstanding warrants in California, Tennessee, and Oregon. Thumper managed to elude detection, but after a long stakeout, he was tracked to a lab near Lancaster, California.
We observed Jonathan John Brown carrying 6 5-gallon containers of acetone. He had about 30 gallons of acetone, which is quite a sizable amount. And by the fact that he had such a sizable quantity would indicate to us that this was a sizable meth lab.
As Brown pulled away in his truck, the police closed in.
Out of the car! Hands to the roof! Move fast!
Thumper was arrested. He was charged with possession of meth and cited for outstanding traffic citations. Police later discovered that Thumper had a large secret drug lab, but by then, Thumper was free on bond and vanished.
Methamphetamine on the street coming directly from a lab would sell for approximately $10,000 a pound.
The photographs will start with overall.
Police estimated that this crude lab could have manufactured amphetamines with a street value of more than $1 million. A few months later, an informant told investigators that Thumper was hiding out at a remote drug lab in Medford, Oregon.
Forcing the door open with the door ram, the entry team received gunfire from inside.
2 police officers were wounded, and 1 gang member was killed.
We're about to introduce chemical weapons into the house. Come out slowly.
The gun battle ended when police used tear gas, and the people in the house finally surrendered.
Keep those hands up.
When officers searched the property, they found a crude lab, but no Thumper.
Thumper was a regular on the premises that stayed there quite often and normally for long periods of time, and was there as early as one day prior to the raid. If the raid would have been done one day earlier, we'd have captured him too.
Update. Minutes after our broadcast, the FBI received a call from a viewer who reported seeing Thumper at a casino 40 miles south of Las Vegas.
Part of the tip was that Brown was in the company of a woman driving a 1990 Camaro vehicle with no license plate.
FBI agents tracked Thumper's companion to a casino located at the California-Nevada border. They staked out the location and within minutes spotted the woman leaving with Thumper.
Brown was seen getting into the vehicle. We followed that vehicle from Cactus Kate's casino to Whiskey Pete's. We pulled up in that white Camaro with a female driving, at which time our agents were able to jockey our cars in position so that when he did eventually get out of the vehicle, he took one step, was placed under arrest, he hit the pavement, and said that he was relieved that it was all over.
Jonathan John Brown was found guilty of conspiracy to manufacture and distribute methamphetamines. His sentence, 30 years. He served his time and has been released.